Hi, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed Finding Your Roots, the overview of season 7 with Henry Louis Gates Jr. and some of his very interesting guests. It's such a great show. If you haven't had a chance to watch the full show, I highly recommend it. And you can stream it right now online. Type in PBS and Finding Your Roots, and you can find all the shows there. So tonight, I want to introduce you to our guests here. We've got Katie Busch, Danielle Orr, and Julie Clark. And tonight, I asked them to join me tonight so we could talk about DNA and history and archiving and things like that. They all sort of interconnect together. So to start with, I want everyone to introduce yourself. So let's start with Katie first.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Katie. I'm the director at the Clark Museum. I've worked at the Clark since 2017 and have kind of done a little bit of everything when it comes to working in a small museum, from archiving to processing donations, research, and outreach with the public.
And Danielle?
Hi, everybody. Let's see. What about me? Well, I'm interested in finding your roots. I have been interested in DNA, and locally, I'm just a person that works, and I've been in radio for a long time, which is how I know Katie Whiteside, and I'm happy to know Julie and Katie Busch, and happy to be here tonight.
Great. And thanks for joining us. And Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Clark, and I work for the Bureau of Land Management at the Headwaters Forest Reserve, and I'm a park ranger. And I do a lot of historical interpretation, and DNA is really special to me, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later.
And let me tell the audience this. Thank you, you guys. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Please do that, the chat. Use the chat. And I know people like to chat back and forth, but ask us some questions. I have a few questions, but it would be nice to hear from you as we start revealing things here tonight. So Katie, let's, the things that all three of you have done is research in different ways. Katie, let's start with you. If you could tell us a little bit about the Clark Historical Museum. I'm wondering, as a curator, what goes on behind the scenes there? You have all these great exhibits, and what happens?
Yeah, a whole lot. But yeah, I mean, behind the scenes, we have a good sized staff. It's me and then 3 other people. One of our other employees is a registrar. Her name's Alex. So whenever someone donates something, she's the one that processes people's paperwork, asks some extra questions just so we have a really good idea of what the item is, where it came from, what its story is. And she also keeps an eye on things in storage. We have a registrar curator specifically for Neelis Hall, which is our Native American collection wing. So she works with everything on that side of the building. She also works with a committee of local tribal leaders to make sure that the interpretation in Neelis Hall is relevant and educational. And then we also have our marketing and outreach person, Dana. So she's the one doing all of our social media type stuff, planning events. If you've been following the Clark over the last year or so, the stuff you're seeing is from her with input from the rest of us. But yeah, we do exhibits throughout the year. We get ideas from the public. We come up with ideas as a staff. We're looking at different events that are coming up, anniversaries especially. People love anniversaries. And we try to do exhibits that are relevant and thoughtful to what's going on currently.
And how hard is it to put those exhibits together? Like, do you have to do some sort of research for the exhibit that you're doing, you know? Like you did you've had a couple of Asian American exhibits there, and I know you had to do research for that.
Mm-hmm.
And other
Yeah, yeah. For the we did a exhibit on the Chinese expulsion and talking about the Chinese residents of Eureka and what happened in 1885 and also 1906. Yeah, that exhibit particularly, we had to do a lot of research for, especially going back into like newspaper archives. There's one through UC Riverside called the California Digital Newspaper Collection, CDNC. And that's available free for access online. They just added a ton of editions of the Blue Lake Advocate, which is really cool if you're looking at local newspapers. And doing a lot of that initial primary research, but that particular kind of time period, it gets really interesting trying to figure out kind of the truth behind all these different stories. There's things that conflict, things that don't match up. So that's kind of an ongoing adventure that I'm still kind of working with some folks on, but also finding things in storage that we don't really have a lot of information on, having to research like what kind of things would make sense to put in the exhibit, things like that. Yeah.
You mentioned to us, I forget exactly the story, but one time somebody showed up with, was it photos or something? And you said there's no information, you're looking at what it is, but then you start talking to the person.
Yeah, that happens pretty regularly. Someone will bring something by. They're like, hey, I have this old thing. Do you guys want it? And I'm like, okay, well, we don't have a lot of storage rooms. So can you like tell me a little bit more about it? Like, what is it? Because sometimes people are like, I found these old shoes. And I'm like, okay. So it makes it more compelling, especially for small museums, if you come in with something and it has a backstory for it. So yeah, like people will bring in photos and they're like, yeah, these are pictures of my family. And I'm like, okay, looking at the back, there's no names. Like, can you tell me who these people are, where these pictures were taken? And they'll tell you these like really great stories. And it's like, oh, okay, I gotta write that down really quick, and it's stuff that, yeah, if they didn't tell me that, we'd be like, okay, these are old photos, but it really does make a difference to be able to have that, context of what an item is, where it came from when it comes to museum collections.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important, I think. And that has been driven through to me via emails with you and me, just because of that. It's important to have and document who we are right now, so that 100 years down the road, when they pick up your picture, Katie, they say, who is that person? Right?
Yeah.
See?
Yeah. And I mean, we just kind of talked about this before, but so this is a teapot that I got from a relative, and it has an inscription on it. It says 1839 to 1889 mother's golden wedding anniversary. And I got it from a relative who had passed away, but I didn't really know anything about, this particular relative. But I just opened it up before this video chat, and there's actually a little piece of paper in there that talks about who it was from and who it was given to and stuff like that. So like when it comes to going through your house, and if you're, downsizing or whatnot, if you have, cool heirlooms and stuff, like write it down, put it with it, attach it somehow. And that's going to make a huge difference in the future when your relatives or you or whoever tries to donate something to a museum or pass it on to another family member. I'm going to have to look into who it was that owned this teapot now that I know.
See, and there we go back to the research that all three of you have done. So now let's move on to talking with Danielle and Julie about your process. You both were adopted, and
That's
right?
Yeah, that's true.
And sorry, and feel free to join in and ask questions. So when did you first discover that you were adopted? Let's start with Julie.
So growing up, I just always knew. So I don't really have a date in mind. I think it was maybe when I was 5 years old. So that part was really clear to me, but the story behind it wasn't revealed until much later. So my mom, they're both passed away now, my adopted parents, but they had shared, my mom was like really afraid that I would go looking for my birth mother. So she told me that they had passed away in a car accident, and that's why I was adopted. And so I didn't really find out the truth until I was much older, when I was like 14 or 15. So there was that transparency about being adopted, but then there was that other side to the story that I found out much later.
Interesting. And Danielle, same question. When did you discover you were adopted?
So it had been a big family secret, actually. So I was just pretty much days away from my 30th birthday when I finally figured it out. And, after I recovered from that, then I set about trying to find search for my birth families, and the documentation that Katie was talking about is so important because you have to follow a trail. And back, I think when both Julie and I began looking, the search was basically on foot and by paper trail. And so if it wasn't documented properly, it's really hard to do. Unlike in this Finding Your Roots, where they use DNA, which makes it so much quicker. I mean, and if you've tested and you match with somebody, it's instantaneous to basically, once you do the test and your results are in, to find, matches. So, so that's how that's when I figured it out. It was a big secret and kind of blew my world up for a while, and been an interesting journey. And that's why I love the show. It's such a great show. I watched it as much as I could because it's fascinating to see the documentation for all the different guests and how they do it and how they go back in time. So I find it just like what Katie Busch is doing at the museum and what Julie does. She's quite a historian in her own right. I find it really fascinating. Just as a person, I find the information interesting. And then in my own personal journey, it's been really great to have DNA and do the research. It's interesting work in itself. It's emotional, but it's been great.
And Julie, how about you? How did you this was back in the 90s, right?
Yeah, so when I was 18, I don't know if people understand this, but in the state of California, if you have a closed adoption, your birth certificate isn't available to you. Even now, it isn't available to me. The original one, it's closed. You'd have to go before a judge, and to get that important piece of information. But I did have a group, Adoptees United, in the 80s, where they kind of gave me steps on what to do and how to find my mother. And what I ended up doing was signing a waiver so that if she ever came looking for me, that the adoption records would be open. And so it was about 10 years later that she actually did come looking for me. And it was because I had opened the records that she was able to find me.
And how was that?
We still have a really great relationship, actually. So I've known her for about 26 years, and she lives in Southern California. So I visit her every year. And I have two sisters and a brother, and several nieces and nephews. And so it's just really kind of special. And I've been part of my siblings. They're a little bit much younger than I am. So I think my younger sister was still in high school when I met her. So she kind of sees me as, her sister that, she grew up with, even though I didn't actually grow up in that household. But she was young enough to see me as that. So as part of the family. So there was kind of a nice smooth transition there.
Right. Good. And Danielle, now you said you went through the testing process. How was it previous to that?
I went through the testing process.
Yeah, the DNA.
Oh yeah. So I had found my mother, on foot sort of, and I was born in another country, and my mother was from another country than the country I was born in. So that was one thing. And like Julie mentioned, birth records are not readily available for most of us adoptees. They're hidden. We don't have rights. We don't have access. And so it's quite a journey. Now with DNA, the interesting thing is you spit in that tube, send it off, and anybody else who has tested, and they have a great system wherein everybody who's tested can upload to a certain site. It's called GEDmatch, and then you are connected by DNA. So that changes the whole search. It's, just like in Finding Your Roots, he uncovers for his guests the paper trail. That's not how it is for Julie and myself. We, have this whole other way of approaching it. We're these lost people, and not everyone wants to have us found. Not everyone wants to have our existence known, as you can tell by the birth certificates. So, but with the DNA, I decided on Father's Day to take a test. I was looking for my father, and on August 8th, actually, I was doing a walk in the Headwaters, or a poetry workshop with Julie. She'll have to tell you about her Headwaters walk tomorrow. Julie, don't forget. But so, so June, Father's Day, I took the test. By August 8th, I had results, and there was a first cousin match, which I knew because I had found my mother's side. It wasn't on my mother's side. So I contacted her and told her, who I was and when I was born. And she came back to me and said, oh yeah, that's my cousin. I think her father and my grandfather were brothers. And so, but she knew who my father was, and she knew where he was, and that he was still alive. I was lucky to find him alive. And she, I think while she was emailing me, she was emailing my father's wife. And so before too long, within a week, I found on Facebook his wife and some family, and they decided they were going to tell him. And so I waited for that. And in the interim, I had two sisters, and we were in touch, and it was pretty wild and amazing and really wonderful. And so he was just up in British Columbia. So quite a different search than the first one as far as timing. Although it took longer in my life to find him, but.
Yeah, so long. And for those of us who have never had to do that, it's really fascinating to hear this. And it sounds very frustrating and painful that they don't open or allow you to see your records. Especially
Well,
when
it's amazing, like you see in Finding Your Roots, that
Yeah.
when the people turn the page and they see these relatives, it's like that. When you see one of your own relatives for the first time, I mean, seeing my father for the first time and my sisters, there are no words to capture, that experience. And there are no words. And so, back to like what Julie does, Katie does at the museum, now it's documented. He actually did pass away 8 weeks after I returned, after spending a month with him. But, there was an obituary back in Montreal, Canada, where I am from originally. And I'm in that obituary. They added me, which was amazing. So now the documentation is there. So,
So now you're part of the tree
now I'm documented.
and you're documented.
I'm legit. I'm a real person.
And Julie, what about you? Doing the tests, and you said that you found your mother.
Yeah.
What about your
So,
father?
I was conceived during the Summer of Love in 1967. So, I think literally like my parents might have known each other for 6 hours or maybe a little bit longer. They met, at a party, and, then 6 weeks later, my mom was pregnant with me. And back then, she, it was a little bit more in 1968, there was a lot more shame involved, even though she was over 18, she was 18 years old. So she moved in with her sister and gave me up. And then when I met her, she said, you're not going to be able to know who your father is. And this was back in 1995. And then Ancestry DNA came out, and I did the swab test. And 4 years ago, I had a cousin match, and I said to myself, it was a second cousin match. And because of all the historical research that I do, I actually do a lot of research on articles, and I build trees in some of the books that I've been writing about Falk and the town of Falk where I work, and then also the Lighthouse book. I was able to really narrow down on who my father was and the family. And so I contacted them in 2017, and we have a very good relationship still. Actually, my dad moved up here to Humboldt County, and he lives down the street. So, I mean, it was pretty magical and serendipitous, and the whole family has really embraced me, and it's been really positive. My grandmother, I look a lot like my grandmother actually, and she's 97 years old. So I actually got to meet her as well. And it's been really a great journey on this side. So, or both birth parents, really positive.
That's
How
fabulous.
long did it take you, Julie, after you found the results to finding the family?
So yeah, it was my unfortunately, like a lot of adoptees will email a relative that they have a match to. So when you do the DNA test, you get matched with different DNA matches, and some are close, some aren't. But this relative got back to me immediately, which is pretty rare actually, within 2 hours. And then I think it was that following Monday. So it was on a Sunday. By Monday, I zeroed in, and then I just started turning the dials and getting on the internet and finding out who these people were. And I was able to contact them, get their emails, and it took a while. My dad didn't know I existed. He has lived his whole life not knowing that he had a daughter, doesn't have children. And so I was used to it at 50, knowing that my dad was out there somewhere, whereas he had to, really wrap his head around it. And it took a while.
Yeah, I wonder how that is in the search. You want to find your parents so much, but does the parent want to be found?
Yeah.
And so you have all these expectations when you contact them. how is that? I mean, I would think it would just be really difficult and challenging and scary. And I don't know if I'd want to do it right away and think about, I'm one of those people that thinks, oh, the good side, the bad side, this, that. When do you do it? Should you do it? Some people don't.
Different for everyone.
Right.
There are a million stories for a million adoptees, or people who don't know who their biological family is. So it really, it does take a lot of emotional wherewithal to prepare yourself for whatever you're going to be met with. And, it's a big deal for them as well, because they're just being approached out of the blue. So it really is a complicated set of circumstances. And it does take a lot of emotional preparation and openness. And you just really don't know what you're going to find.
Yeah. So if people who are adopted watching right now, what would you tell them? And also to the people who gave up their children.
Well, there are, go nice and easy, and everybody has different needs. So if you're doing the test and you get results, it's, a good idea to sit with those results for a day or, longer, however much you need, and then decide how you're going to approach the situation. It's very personal, and there isn't a map that works for everyone. So, I found this first match, she showed up. And so, I wrote and I gave all the specifics so that, they would know when I was born. So that would be good information. And so it's pretty, it's a big, big ocean of circumstances. There really is no just one way to do it, but you have to spit in the tube first. You have to do the DNA, and you find all sorts of other people. I mean, I'm having great conversations on Ancestry. Julie and I talk about this. I'm having great conversations with other relatives that find me more distant cousins, but they're building trees. And this goes back to Katie, the building of the tree and the learning where your family comes from and what some of those people did and all that documentation. So it really is like being in a living museum while you're in this process, because you are creating documentation. And a lot of times there are great genealogists in the family, and a lot of times there are not. My sister will say to me, someone's contacted me on one of the sites, I don't know who they are. And I tell her right away, oh, it's so-and-so, or, so, but, back to like what we all appreciate at the Clark Museum, that documentation, it's a trail. It's a cookie crumbs, and you follow them and you find this and you find that. And it's fascinating. It's history. If you have any interest in history, it's all right there in the taking for you.
And
Yeah, I've helped a lot of people find their parents, actually. And fortunately, my husband, actually, he did 23andMe, and then he had a relative that was adopted that said, I'm your husband's cousin. And so I was able to find her birth mother. And when she couldn't, and she was in her 60s, and she just met with her birth mother before she died. So that was really rewarding. I mean, you can, if you can start building trees on your own, and I'd be even, willing to help anybody that wanted to, that reached out with my time.
Were you going to say something, Katie Busch?
Yeah, I was just gonna say how so I've seen probably not as many episodes as you guys have seen, but for Finding Your Roots, one of the things that I thought was always really cool about it was just how you can connect your own personal family history to these larger, things that were going on. Like Julie mentioned, the Summer of Love, like how events going on can impact all the way down to the individual. Because when you're learning about history in school, a lot of times it's like, there were these dudes over here and they fought some wars and now we're here, and it just makes it much more of a personal experience to be like, my family was involved in this larger event, and our stories were shaped by these histories. It makes it much more personal, I guess would be the word for it. But I always thought that was cool.
Katie, what do you recommend that people do to document, or any one of you? What do you all recommend people do who want to document themselves? I know we have online, there's some online sites that are free that have family trees, but what do you guys recommend?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind for me is old photos. Kind of talked a little bit about that, but because a lot of people scan photos and things like that, but being sure that whoever is in the photo, it's noted who they are. And sometimes people will put like, oh, this is so and so's great grandmother, and this is their like cousin, and all this stuff. Like that's super important. To be able to have pictures of people is really, really something else. And there are people that, like, one group that comes to mind is Myrtle Grove Cemetery has been doing a lot of work on not only documenting the graves that are at that site, but also like attaching photos and obituaries and things like that, and just really building out those freely accessible resources online. Because there are so many, paywalls and things nowadays. It's really nice to still be able to have access to these free resources online, put together by volunteers. But yeah, that's one thing that comes to mind.
I just jumped into the chat and I'm reading all your comments. They're really wonderful comments. We had a birth mother listening and was touched by her own personal story. And someone wrote also about Gates and how much he's doing to educate the American public or anyone watching about the African American journey in this country, and amazing story. Yep. So thanks for all your comments. Jed Match, yes, I did find a Jed Match match, my sister, 1973 Centimorgans. I call her 1973. That's a lot of Centimorgan. She's my sister. Yeah, you guys have you read the chat questions, you guys?
Yeah, I'm actually typing that back to Robertson. He's just saying that he found some information in his family and he's not sure if he wants to stir things up. And like you said, it's really personal what you want to do. It can go so many different ways, but it can be really positive. So I always lean on the positive with these kinds of things. But it all depends on the circumstance and the situation around what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and like any relationship, going nice and slow and easy is the way to go. You don't just jump in. It's like dating. It's basically like dating. The whole DNA thing, right? You're either going to get dumped or there's no second date or they even have a thing, they call it the honeymoon phase, when you find your relatives and everybody's really happy for a while and then it sort of drifts off. So, but I think like you just said, Julie, shooting for positive first, and you go nice and easy, and you not everybody in non-adoptive families relates to their siblings or their cousins, so it's just like that. It's no different. We just have this extra the adoptee situation is it's compounded.
Well, and Julie, talk about the just like you're talking, but it's like getting kicked in the stomach, right? If you were given away, this is what you talked about previous to. Talk a little bit about that.
So with adoptees, there's kind of like what's called a primal wound. So when you're given away, whether you know it or not, you're given away from, I mean, you're listening to your mother's heartbeat, her voice, everything is so familiar when you're in her womb, and then all of a sudden that is no more. And, you know, so that affects you on a really psychological level. So then when you go reach out later on in life as an adult, there's also that huge fear of rejection. And
yeah, you feel like a little baby. You're like,
yeah, I mean, you kind of like go back to that primal part of yourself. I mean, even though, you know, I was 27 years old and then I was 50 when I met my father, you know, it was a lot of emotional work, and you kind of have to have it, you know, adult. You have to have it together within yourself. You can't be, you know, super needy about wanting the outcome. You have to really kind of be grounded in your own sense of yourself. So it was actually really fortunate that, and then I did meet my parents when I did, and that I was more, you know, mature enough to really have my own sense of who I was before I met them and be healthy. Sometimes situations with adoptees will get into a relationship like the honeymoon phase, and they'll be really needy for each other because, you know, you kind of have this hole in yourself. And when you're growing up and, you know, nobody looks like you, and there's just all these different things that happen. And then when you come together, you're sort of, you can be really needy with each other, and that doesn't work out. I mean, it doesn't work out with anybody. So you have to be really healthy and cautious and careful. And like Danielle said, you can't just, you know, spill your guts out when you first meet them.
Yeah. That's tough. What to
thanks
do.
everybody in the chat. Your comments are so,
Yeah, great.
it's really great to read them. So thanks
Yeah,
for
you have to
everybody
be really-
participating.
Yeah, you have
Does
to be
anybody
really
have
brave.
questions though? Do you guys have questions? I think they like hearing the stories, but
Yeah, the stories are fascinating, really. They're
yeah. I could tell.
yeah, I had secondary rejection from my mother after 3 years of really quite close contact. I have 2 brothers on that side, and she was going to tell them, and she kept saying for 3 years, I'm going to tell them. And she just couldn't, you know, do it. So since I wanted to find them, and actually she put me on the phone once with my grandmother, but she said if I ever told my grandmother or my brothers that I existed, she'd never talk to me again. And she held firm to her word. I haven't talked to her in years. So, you know, it's, that was pretty brutal, but that happens too. So, but it's still better to find, I think, and know.
There's a lot of bravery involved, I think, Danielle, in this journey.
And it seems like you, I mean, I'm not adopted, but putting myself in your places, I would do the same things you've all done and think about it probably for maybe too long, but I'd want to know. I'd want to see them, or at least something. Even if I didn't contact them, at least pictures.
Well, that's why like the museum is so important, and any kind of historical information is so important, because those pictures are, you know, they mean so much. And you know, I mean, that was one thing I was wondering about Katie and the Clark. Do you work with the Historical Society, Katie, to patch together some of Humboldt's history?
Yeah, we do work pretty regularly with them. We'll borrow things for exhibits and whatnot. But yeah, luckily we have a really good working relationship with them, because they're kind of Humboldt County's paper items repository. We kind of have the stuff. They have the paper. But yeah, I know they have a pretty good collection that helps with genealogical work, and that's the Marilyn Melota collection. They have an entire room for it because it's so many. It's Marilyn Melota was this lady who just collected information on like thousands of Humboldt County individuals, like newspaper clippings and
Yeah.
and she even has a couple of books which I really want to go sit down and look through one of these days, where it was just like interesting articles she came across that didn't really fit into her index of what she was collecting, but were just like random stories she found funny or interesting. But yeah, it's pretty incredible the stuff that you can find, even just locally.
Right. It's amazing. All of these stories. And speaking of stories, don't forget, Keet is also collecting stories for our Snapshots project. So,
How do they do that and get them to you, Katie?
oh, they can go to our website, KEET.org, and on the left side where it says, I think we have it in events, look for snapshots. You'll actually be sending it to me, and I'll be sending it to Ted Pease at the Senior Resource Center, and it will go into the senior news if he picks your stories and pictures. It's been really interesting. They're slowly trickling in, and it's fun, I think. We're also filming people out in the community right now too, which is exciting as part of this project. And also in Humboldt County, there are a few snapshot projects taking place. So come to Keet. We'll help you. We'll post you.
And
I'm wondering, let's see, it looks like we should be wrapping up, but if you have questions, go ahead and submit them now so we can answer them. Because I think we're wrapping up. So go ahead and do that. And we're looking at the chat. I think all of us are looking. Yeah, the Humboldt State Library.
Have any of you used Humboldt State Library to find local connections?
Yeah, well, for me, I use it constantly for the book that I'm doing, Humboldt County Lighthouses, through Arcadia Publishing. And then I've also done the Town of Falk, the company Town of Falk that's at Headwaters. That's published, and that was so they have a heavy great image collection that you can actually go online and just search and find really nice resolution photos and use those, and they're a great resource. And then just before I forget, tomorrow's a hike tomorrow out at Falk, now that I'm mentioning it. And so it's at 10 a.m. at Elk River, and it's about a 3-mile hike. And I will be talking about the town of Falk that's no longer there. It was a lumber company town.
You have to sign up for that, Julie?
Yeah.
You just you show up? Where do you show up?
Elk River Trailhead. So the end of Elk River Road, just south of Eureka, and you'll just drive to the end of Elk River, and it dead ends in the BLM parking lot. So I will be there.
Excellent. Danielle, would you mind giving a couple of your resources, like your podcasts?
Oh, there are some great adoptee resources. There's one called Who Am I Really? And that is a podcast geared towards people who have found family members, so they're in reunion with their families. There's another really good one that has about 4 seasons, Adoptees On, and her name's Haley, and she has on adoptees from all walks of life and countries, and so that's a really valuable resource as well for navigating being adopted, as well as reunion.
Great.
Those are 2. And once you plug into those 2, you'll be able to find other ones. I had no idea, since my adoption was a secret, I had no idea, I'd heard about adoption, of course, and but I had no idea there was such a big community. So like with all communities, if you are experiencing something, there are other people also experiencing it. So it's good to plug into those communities for support and resources, and just like you would at a museum. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of great adoptee resources these days.
Great. And Katie, what's going on at the Clark? And you've got some stuff going on at the Clark.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff going on at the Clark,
Yeah.
getting into the summertime. So we're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We just opened our Tools of the Trade exhibit talking about the history of firefighting locally through tools and how they've changed over time. This coming Saturday, actually part of the reason why we did that exhibit specifically is because there's a fallen firefighters memorial that's going up in Clark Plaza. That's going to be officially dedicated at 1 p.m. on this Saturday, which is going to be really, really great. Then we also have, we're doing walking tours of the historic site of Eureka's Chinatown, which is where Coast Central Credit Union is now, right near Old Town. I'm doing those in conjunction with Humboldt Asian and Pacific Islanders and a group called the Eureka Chinatown Project, which is working to better recognize and share the story of Eureka's Chinatown, the Chinese expulsion, and kind of the implications that that has had into the present. So there's one of those tours this weekend, which is sold out, but we have one in July and one in August that both have plenty of spots available. If you go onto our website, clarkmuseum.org, there's a little tab at the top that says tours. There's a thing on there that says Chinatown tours. You can click there and get signed up for a tour. The proceeds go to the museum and also to the Chinatown Project, which is doing all kinds of stuff. A mural, they got a plaque going up, they got signs, walking tours, all kinds of stuff. So we also have our third tea event that's going to be coming up. So we've done a series of teas. The first two have been virtual, of course, because of COVID. But this one is going to be a Victorian themed tea happening at the Annie B. Ryan House in Eureka. That's going to be July 18th. We haven't started selling tickets yet for it, but if you follow us on social media or join our newsletter, also through our website, you'll be notified first thing when ticket sales happen. And there's all sorts of other stuff that's constantly being announced. So get in the loop by joining our newsletter or following us on social media. We're constantly sitting in the office coming up with new things. So it's a lot of fun. But that's just a little snapshot.
Great. And any last thoughts from any of you?
There's a question. Let's see. Did you mention a DNA group or search? So well, if you take the test, Patty, then that plugs you into everybody else who's tested. And then there are groups on Facebook you can look for DNA groups. If you just plug that in, now with the internet, it's pretty easy. So just try your search bar and plug in DNA groups or DNA detectives or something like that. And then you'll get some resources come up to you.
Great. All right. I think we're wrapping it up.
Katie, thanks for having us. It was really an interesting evening. And thank you. Keith's doing such a great job, and you're doing such a great job over there.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you too. It sounds like you're all doing great things out in the community. It's great.